Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at bash scripting. So what is a bash script? Well, bash script is a list of AWS command lines that will be run when your EC2 instance first starts up, and you basically provide it in a script. So you could go in there and install Apache. You could apply all your kernel updates. You could go in there and install PHP, MySQL, etc. So this is a hands-on lab, and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I'm actually in a text editor right now. I'm using Text Wrangler, but you can use whatever text editor you want. And we're just going to create a really simple home page. So we're going to type in HTML, and then we're going to do body, and then we're going to do a header, and then we're just going to write hello cloud gurus. And then we're going to end our header, end our body, and then we're going to end our HTML and HTML. So that is a very, very simple web page that just says hello cloud gurus. So I want you to go ahead and save this. Make sure you save it as a HTML page. So I'm going to save this into my documents, and I'm going to call it index.html. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now I'm going to go over to the AWS console. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console. The very first thing I want you to do is just change your region over to US East Northern Virginia. And I'll show you why a little bit later, but it's really important just so that we are all in the same region in order to make this work. Next thing we want to do is just go over to S3, and we're going to create an S3 bucket where we're going to store that HTML file that we just uploaded. So go in, create your bucket. Again, just do US standard, which is Northern Virginia. And for the bucket name, just call it, my website bucket, something like that. There's no way that that domain name would be free, but I'm going to do a cloud guru, something like that. Okay, so there's my bucket. It's been created, and if I go into it, I'm just going to go and upload that HTML file that we created to this bucket. So here it is, index.html, and go ahead and hit open and start upload. And so that has now uploaded to my S3 bucket. Remember, all buckets are private by default. So if I actually click in on this object and try and open it, I'm going to get an error message saying access denied. Okay, so now that we have created our bucket and uploaded our object to the bucket, let's go back to the main console, and we just want to go into Identity Access Management. And the reason is we deleted the role in our last lecture, so we need to recreate a role. So go into our roles, and we're going to create a new role. We'll just call it my S3 admin access, something like that. And we're going to use an EC2 role, and we're going to apply, and if we just type in here S3, Amazon S3 full access, and apply that policy to the role. Go ahead and create the role. So there we go, we've got our role created. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into EC2, and we're going to create an EC2 instance with this role attached. But we're not going to give it a bash script just yet, because I want to show you the logic of how we can create bash scripts. So if you go through and just launch an instance, we're going to use an Amazon Linux AMI. We're going to use a T2 micro, and in here we're going to apply our role, so my S3 admin access. Now your bash scripts are always passed through under this advanced details, and you would put it in here. You always start a bash script with a shebang. So a shebang is simply this number symbol followed by an exclamation mark, and then followed by the path to our interpreter. So our interpreter is basically just going to interpret our bash commands and run them sequentially at root level when this VM first starts up. So I will just do one. Let's do a yum update -yes, and just copy and paste this into Notepad. Okay, so I've just pasted it into my Notepad here. I'm going to go back over here, and we'll go ahead and go next. And we're just going to use the standard storage. We're going to call this my test bash script server, something like that. Go ahead and add your security groups, and then select an existing security group. Select one, because we are in a new region, you might not have this particular security group. So if you want to create your own, let's just do it for argument's sake. Call it WebDMZ, and I'm going to allow SSH and port 80, so HTTP, to open to all of the world. So go ahead and hit review and launch. and go ahead and launch. And of course, if you haven't gone out of Northern Virginia before, you might have to create a new key pair. So I'm just going to call it, my NV key pair, and download it. And now I'm going to launch my instance. Okay, so just wait. I'm just going to pause the video and wait for this instance to be assigned a public IP address. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and SSH into this instance, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I've got my public IP address. I'm just going to copy and paste this into my clipboard, and now I'm going to go over to the terminal window. Okay, so just navigate over to where you downloaded your key pair. So for me, it was in Downloads, and then I actually moved it over to a subdirectory called SSH that I have in here. So you can see it here, my NV key pair. Change your permissions on the key so that you can actually use it. So chmod 400 my NV key pair, and there we go. And then all we need to do is type SSH ec2 -user, and then and then the IP address, and then -i, and then the name of the key pair. So there we go. And hit enter, and go ahead and type yes, and you should be able to SSH in. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root, so sudo su, and now I'm going to clear the screen. So all we did in our very first bash script was we ran a yum update. So if I just try that again, yum update -yes, and hit enter, there should be no updates, and you can see there we go, no packages marked for update. So it has already run that at a root level. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a little web server, and we're going to copy across our index.html file from our S3 bucket to our EC2 instance. And every time we enter a command in the shell, we're going to copy and paste that command over to Notepad. And this way we're going to be able to build out our bash script manually. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to install Apache. So I'd say yum install httpd -yes. And there we go, it's installed that. And then what I would do is you can cut and paste it, or you can just type it back into your, into your text file. So in here we go yum install httpd -yes. And then we go back to terminal. So we've installed Apache. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the Apache service. So service httpd start. And then we're also going to make it so that our service will come on in case our EC2 instance reboots itself. So we do that by typing check config httpd on, and there we go. And so now we just want to copy that over to our notepad. So service httpd start, and then I'll just write it in manually here to save some time. Check config httpd on. Okay, and now, so basically what we've done so far is we've applied our updates, we've downloaded the Apache service, we've started it, and we've made sure that it will start up automatically if our EC2 instance resets. The last thing we want to do is we want to we want to copy our file from S3 over to our var www.html directory. There's a couple of ways you can do this. Let's go to the var www directory first of all. So cd var www.html and hit enter. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that in here into my notepad. So let's copy that in here. And then now what we want to do is we want to copy from our S3 bucket to our var www.html. So what we would do is we type in here AWS S3 copy, and then the URL is going to be S3 and then the name of our bucket. Now if you've forgotten the name of your bucket, you can just type in AWS S3 ls, and this is also a good way of testing that you've got the role applied to the EC2 instance. If this hasn't worked for you, go back and check that the role you've applied the S3 admin role to your EC2 instance. So here is my bucket name. It's my website bucket A Cloud Guru. I'm just going to copy that into my clipboard. So now we type AWS S3 copy, and then S3, and then // and then the name of the bucket, and then // and we'll just do the file itself at this stage. So index.html, and we want to copy that to var www./html. Go ahead and hit enter. And you can see it said download, so it's downloaded this file from our S3 bucket to our EC2 instance, so that has worked successfully. So just copy and paste that command in here into your text file editor. Now, if you're getting some kind of version 4 error, what that is that if it's saying it's unsigned, make sure that you've actually done this in the Northern Virginia region. Some regions that command won't work. You'd have to do that command, and then you'd have to do / and then the region, and then the name of the region in which you are, in which the EC2 instance is actually in. So that trips a lot of students up, and that's why I said at the start of this lecture, just make sure you're in Northern Virginia. But this is also why I'm showing you how to create bash scripts manually, because you can troubleshoot, and when a command finally does work, you can copy and paste that into your text file, and you know that it's going to work the very next time. So we have copied it across. Let's just have a quick look and make sure it is actually in our EC2 instance. So we'll just type in ls. So there it is, index.html, and we can go into it and go nanoindex.html and just make sure it's there. Yep, it says hello Cloud Gurus. We'll just check that HTTPD is on, so service HTTPD status. Yep, it's running. So that is literally it. So if we go back to our text wrangler, what this bash script will now do is it will go in, it will update our EC2 instance, it will install Apache, it will start the Apache service, it'll make sure the Apache service starts every time this EC2 instance reboots itself. We're then changing our directory. We don't necessarily, you don't actually need this line here. We were just doing it to see, to run ls command after we've run this, so we can take that out actually. And then we've got AWS S3 copy S3 and then the name of your website bucket, and then do that to var www.html. So this is our bash script. Now let's go ahead and test this. So we'll go back over to our browser, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to terminate this instance. So instance state terminate, and you'll see my terminal window will come up. Yep, saying it's sad that it's just lost our EC2 instance. Go ahead and hit launch. So we want our Amazon Linux AMI, and we want to make sure we've got a T2 micro. And now what we want to do is we want our role to be my S3 admin access. And in here, our advanced details, we want to just grab the bash script that we've created. So copy and paste and just put it in here. So we've got our, starting up here, we've got our shebang and our path to our interpreter. We're running a yum update, so we're updating the OS. We're installing Apache. We're starting the Apache service. We're making sure Apache starts if this EC2 instance reboots. And then we're copying our website file from S3 over to our EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and hit next for storage. Just leave everything as default. We'll call this my website test. Go ahead and hit next for your security group. Use the existing security group that you just created. So mine was called Northern Virginia. And go ahead and hit launch. And yep, just say you acknowledge it and launch the instance. So now, in theory, if we go back to view instances, we'll wait for this to provision, but we should just be able to enter the IP address into our browser, followed by /index.html, and we should see, the website Hello Cloud Gurus. And we've taken that website data from S3 where it was protected. You can't go into S3 and get that because we never made that object public. So we're moving data from S3 into EC2 automatically using a bash script. So I'm just going to pause the video and wait for this to fire up. So it has fired up, but again, I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes because bash scripts can take 30 seconds up to 1 or 2 minutes to run depending on your performance. So do give it a couple more minutes before you type in this public IP address. Okay, so grab your public IP address and just copy it over to your clipboard. Okay, and just open up a new tab and paste it in there, and there you go. You can see Hello Cloud Gurus. If you're seeing the Apache landing page, just do /index.html. It's all the same thing, but it is resolving. So we've already automated the deployment of a web server, and we've actually pulled down the information that we want on that web server from S3 just by using a bash script. So you can see how things start to become a lot easier. We can start automating our web servers, and then this really starts to lead into auto scaling, which we're going to cover off in 2 labs from now. In the next lab, we're going to show you how to get some instance metadata. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to learn about instance metadata, and this is basically just data about our EC2 instance, things like the public IP address or the private IP address, and how we can access this data from the command line. And it's a really important topic to know going into the exam. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console and I need to just go over to EC2, and I'm just going to create a brand new instance. I'm going to go launch instance, use the Amazon AMI. I'm going to use a T2 micro, hit next. I'm going to assign the S3 admin access role. I'm going to go ahead and hit next, and I'm just going to call this metadata. And I'm going to go ahead and hit next. I'm going to use my normal security group that I always use, the WebDMZ, and hit review and launch, and then I'm going to use my private key. So I've provisioned an entirely new instance for this lecture. And go ahead and hit view instances, and as soon as this instance comes live, I'm going to open up my terminal window and SSH into it. So I'm just going to pause the video here. Okay, so my EC2 instance has now been provisioned, and here is my public IP address. So I'm just going to highlight this and go over to my terminal, and I'm going to SSH into it. So SSH EC2-user at, and then the public IP, and then using my my private key, so my EC2 PEM. Hit yes, and then I'm going to elevate my privileges. I'm going to elevate my privileges and then clear the screen. Okay, so to get our metadata, it's really simple. We do this using the curl command, and then we've got to go to this address. So it's http:// and then it's 169.254.169.254, then /, and then it's latest because we want the latest, and then /, and then it's meta-data. Then /. And you're going to need to remember that URL going into the exam. It is really important. So if you are not a numbers person, just remember it's the lowest number followed by the highest number in terms of IP addresses. So 169.254.169.254. You know, potentially they could mix them around. I don't know if they actually do that, but it's just the easiest way to remember it for me. And then /, latest, and then / metadata. And that will basically return a whole bunch of different variables that you can see here. So if I want to get the public IP address, I can hit the up arrow and I can type public-IPv4, and you can see that public IP address has been returned here. So it's 52.48.51.207. Now what we could do is hit the up arrow again and then do the greater than symbol, and then we could write this to a web page. So we could say my public IP.html and hit enter, and there we go. We can see that it's written to it. So if I do ls, I can see the my public IP.html. So I could go in and just double check that it has actually written that that IP address to it. So my public IP.html, and there we go. We can see my public IP address in there. Now, having just done the bash scripting lab, you can kind of imagine what you could start using this for. So we could do that curl command as a bash script, and then basically write things like our public IP address, our host name, our instance ID, etc., all to a text file. And then using another command, we then move that over to an S3 bucket. We could then you know, set an action on that S3 bucket so that a Lambda function automatically you know, triggers as soon as that information has been written to an S3 bucket, and that Lambda function could then go in and, you know, update our DNS entries to route 53. So you can see how everything's starting to connect together. And just to prove a point, if we were to do curl http / 169.254.169.254 / latest, and then / user-data /. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture, and this is one of the best lectures in the course, certainly the one that I enjoy teaching the most. So we're going to teach you how to use launch configurations and auto scaling groups. So you're going to need to log into the AWS console, but the first thing I want you to do is just go into your favorite text editor. Okay, so all we're going to do here is create our health check text. So I'm just going to write I am healthy, and then I'm going to save this. And then I'm just going to call it health check index.html. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is go over to the AWS console. Okay, so I'm in the AWS console and I'm just going to go over to S3 and I'm going to access that bucket that we created for the Bootstrap script. So it's a Cloud Guru website bucket. And currently I've got my index.html in there, and I'm just going to quickly upload that health check file that we just created. So there we go, healthcheck.html, and hit start upload. And so now we've got an index page and a health check. So what I'm going to do now is go back across to EC2. And if you remember, we created an elastic load balancer. And if you've deleted that load balancer, you'll need to recreate it. But essentially, at the moment, it's got no instances behind it. It's available across all three availability zones. It runs a health check to healthcheck.html, and our healthy threshold is 2, and our unhealthy threshold is 2, and our healthy threshold is 3, and our interval is 10 seconds. So within 20 seconds, it would detect whether or not our site had or our EC2 instance had gone offline, and within 30 seconds, it would detect whether or not it was healthy. So I'm going to leave all the settings for this elastic load balancer as they are. And what I'm going to do now is go over to launch configurations under the auto scaling section. And we're going to go in and create an auto scaling group. So let's start with the basics. Before you can create an auto scaling group, you have to create a launch configuration. And it's essentially just going through what you would normally do when you create an EC2 instance. So we'll hit click launch configurations. And then we're going to select our AMI. So you can use the Amazon Linux AMI here, or you could even go into My AMIs. And if you've got your own custom AMIs that you've provisioned from snapshots, you would be able to select them in here. We don't yet have that, but we will be using that on later on in the course. So I'm going to go ahead here and just use the normal standard Amazon Linux AMI. I'm going to go ahead and use T2 Micro. So what are we going to call this launch configuration group? We're just going to call it my auto scaling group, and I'm not going to use spot instances. I am going to use my S3 admin role, and in here I can put in my Bootstrap script. So I can do kernel ID and RAM disk ID. Again, you don't need to really know what that is for the purposes of the exam, but you can put in your Bootstrap scripts here. So I'm going to use the same Bootstrap script that we used in the lab for Bootstrap scripts. So I've just got it in my clipboard. So if you remember, it was the shebang followed by the path to our interpreter to initialize the Bootstrap script, and then everything else that's run under here is done on, using root level access when this EC2 instance first fires up. So we're installing Apache, we're updating the OS, we're then copying the contents of our bucket, and then we are starting the Apache service, and we're making sure that the Apache service stays on in case the EC2 instance reboots. So what we need to do here is just enter in our bucket. Remember, if you've forgotten the name of your bucket, you can just click that arrow and open it in a new tab, go over to S3, and then you can get the name of your bucket. So mine is a Cloud Guru website bucket. So I'm going back over here. So S3, a Cloud Guru website bucket. And what I'm actually going to do, instead of just copying each individual object, I'm going to copy the entire contents of the bucket. So I'm just going to remove that, and then to var www.html, and then we just need to use this switch, which is recursive. And again, I'll put this this slightly updated script in the resources section of this lecture, but that should be it. That will essentially copy the entire contents of our bucket to our web directory, and then it will start the Apache service and make sure the Apache service remains on in case this instance reboots. Here we've got our IP address type, so only assign a public IP address to instances launched in the default VPC and subnet. Assign a public IP address to every instance. Do not assign a public IP address to any instances. What I'm going to do is just leave it as the default for now, because what we are going to want to do is access each instance individually, as well as being able to access it via the load balancer. So just leave it as the default value for now. Go ahead and add our storage, that's fine. Our security group, we will just use the existing web DMZ security group. Go ahead and hit review. And that's basically it. You're going to get this little warning message about SSH being open to the world. You can review everything that you've done, and then you can create your launch configuration group. And again, select the EC2 key pair. So essentially, it's just like creating an EC2 instance, except when you hit create launch configuration group, you're not actually provisioning any EC2 instance. Now, straight away, we've created our launch configuration group, and now we're on our create auto scaling group page. It takes us straight there. So we'll call this group. So the launch configuration name is up here, so we can see my auto scaling group. So I'm going to call the group name my auto scaling group as well. And the group size, I'm actually going to start with 3 instances. It's up to you how many you want to start with. Just remember, we're going to have to stay within free tier, but certainly at least start with 2, just so you can get this lab to work. The network, we're just going to use the default VPC. Okay, so in our subnets, we click in here and you can see our different availability zones. So if you click just one availability zone, it will create this auto scaling group within that particular availability zone. So the whole reason around auto scaling is to have a redundant, platform, a redundant website. So if you lose one individual availability zone, it shouldn't have an impact on your website whatsoever. You shouldn't have any downtime. So obviously, you probably want to choose all availability zones. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to choose all within this region. Now, you see we've got 3. What auto scaling will automatically do is it will put one instance in here, one instance in here, one instance in here. So it will put them across the 3 availability zones. It's not going to be silly and just put 3 instances in one availability zone, unless, of course, you only give it that option by removing the availability zone. So I'm going to spread it across 3. Likewise, if you had 4, it would then put another instance in an availability zone, but it spreads it evenly across the different availability zones. Here we've got our advanced details. Now this is important. So we've got our elastic load balancer that we created in one other lab, in the elastic load balancing lab. So what we're going to do here is click receive traffic from the elastic load balancer, and we're going to select our elastic load balancer. So it's called MyWebDMZ. And then we need to select our health check type. So do we want to run our health checks off EC2, or do we want to run it off our elastic load balancer? And I'm going to select my elastic load balancer. Okay, so we then have our health check grace period. And this is basically the length of time that auto-scaling waits before checking an instance's health status. So the grace period begins when an instance first comes into service. And if no value is, default value is 300 seconds, so it's 5 minutes, 0 for enter no, 0 for no grace period. So if you remember, we've got our Bootstrap scripts that are running, and it's going to go in and actually, first it's going to go in and install Apache, then it's going to apply all our updates, then it's going to move the contents of our S3 bucket across, and then it's going to turn Apache on. Now, basically, our health check is going to fail until Apache is turned on. So we wouldn't really want that as 0 seconds. And really, the length of time is just depends. You can go out and try your Bootstrap script and see how quickly it takes for that EC2 instance to come up. I'm going to change this and just be a little bit conservative, and I'm going to make it 2.5 minutes, so 150 seconds. So that should give me plenty of time for my EC2 instance to come on, install Apache, apply all the updates, and then move the contents of that bucket across. Okay, so we just leave the other values as our default and go ahead and hit next to configure our scaling policies. Okay, so we then have configure our scaling policies, and essentially this allows us to automatically increase our the number of instances in our auto scaling group, or decrease the number of instances in our auto scaling group depending on what settings we do. So we can click here and we can say scale between, let's say, 1 and let's say 5 instances. And we can go in here and say take the action. First of all, we need to add an alarm. So it says execute policy when, and there's no alarm selected at this stage. So I can go in and create an alarm. So basically within here, I can say whenever the average of CPU utilization is greater than or equal to, let's say, 90%, for one consecutive period of 5 minutes. And I don't want to get an SNS notification, so I'm going to uncheck that and I go ahead and hit create. So essentially what this is doing now is it's going to, as soon as this alarm is triggered, we then take this action. So if my CPU utilization is greater than 90% for more than 5 minutes, I want to add one instance
when CPU utilization is greater than 90% for infinity. So I'm going to add one instance, and then instances need however long to warm up after each step. So I'm going to wait another 5 minutes before doing this again. And we can do a similar one here. We can decrease the group size. Let's say if my CPU utilization is less than 90%, I can start killing the instances within that auto-scaling group. So then that way my auto-scaling group will grow and shrink depending on how much, depending on the load of the CPU. So you can actually do really clever things in here. Now, for the purposes of this lab, we're not going to decrease and increase the group size. We will do that later on in the assignment that's coming up. So I'm just going to go back here and click on keep this group at its initial size. So we can configure our notifications here. So we could say send a notification to the sysadmin team with these recipients. So you can just enter in an email address. So I'll just do the acloudguru@gmail.com address. And basically it's going to send us an email whenever instances launch, terminate, fail to launch, or fail to terminate. So go ahead and hit next. We can then configure our tags. So we could say, staff ID, these instances relate to this particular staff member. We could also say that the department, these instances belong to department. And then we could say, this is the test and dev team. And we'll go ahead and hit review. And there we go. So this is our auto scaling group. It's all ready to go, and we go ahead and hit create auto scaling group. And so now it will go through, it's going to go in and launch our EC2 instances. So if we actually come back over to the EC2 dashboard, you will see if we go into our running instances, we can see that our 3 instances are now being launched. And if you actually go in and check, you can see it's spread across the 3 availability zones automatically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video and wait for these instances to come up online. If our Bootstrap script has worked, we won't need to SSH into these instances at all. It will automatically pull down the contents of our web page. So I'm just going to pause the video now. We'll see what happens. Okay, so that didn't take very long. We can see here our 3 different instances, and we've got our 3 different public IP addresses. So if I go to 1A, you can see it's 52.16.2.58, which you can see here. If I click on this tab, you can see hello Cloud Gurus, I'm now alive. And if I check in on each URL or each IP address, we can see the same index page that's being shown. So it has worked. The other thing we can also do is just go to our Elastic Load Balancer and grab this DNS name. And if we open up a new tab and just enter this DNS name, you can now see it's going to one of the 3 instances, hello Cloud Gurus, I'm now alive. So let's do something fun. Let's go back in and just start killing instances just for the fun of it and see what happens. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to kill 1A and just go ahead and go terminate. And then I'm also going to go ahead and terminate in 1C. So only 1B has stayed alive. So essentially what I'm doing here is So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm simulating availability zone failure across 2 availability zones. And I want to see how auto-scaling reacts. So I've just gone in, and the only IP address that's still valid is this .234. So if I go here and hit refresh, you can see it's going to start timing out. Same with .160. If I hit refresh, it's going to start timing out. Whereas 234, if I hit refresh, it's still alive. Now, if I go in here and use my my Elastic Load Balancer and hit refresh, it's going to still deliver traffic to my instances that are alive. And the way it's figuring that out is through the health checks. It knows that this EC2 instance is currently alive, whereas these 2 instances are currently in trouble. And if we go down to our Elastic Load Balancer, we can actually view how this is all working. So go in and see our instances. So straight away it's detected that only 1 instance is in service. The other 2 instances are now out of service, and it's not sending traffic to those instances. So let's go back to our EC2 dashboard and have a look at what's going on. So it's going to take our auto scaling group just a little bit of time to figure this out, figure out that there has been a problem. But if we just go ahead and hit refresh, we can see, okay, it has now realized that one of my instances has gone down. and it is replacing that instance using the pending one. And that instance has now come up and is running. So it's automatically starting to re-provision my instances in different availability zones. And I now have a new public IP address .116, which I don't have up here. The important thing is, though, however, my Elastic Load Balancer is still serving traffic to the instances that are still healthy. So it is very clever technology. You can basically have instances spread across multiple availability zones, and even if you lose 2 of those availability zones out of 3, you still won't have an outage. On top of this, we can start doing really cool things with Route 53, whereby we start protecting ourselves for regional failures. So if an entire region goes down, Route 53 will detect this and it will start sending traffic to other parts of the world. And we'll cover that off in the Route 53 section of this course. Okay, so that's it, Cloud Gurus. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. By the way, if you want to go in and delete your auto-scaling groups, it's probably best. So you just click on auto-scaling group here and just go to actions and hit delete, because you don't want to be running 3 instances at any given time. And by the way, when you do that, it will go in and delete all the EC2 instances automatically. It will start turning them off and just shutting them down. If I go ahead and hit refresh, you can see it's already shutting down one instance and it'll shut this other one down shortly. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lab. Thank you.